Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podCAST Iron. My name is Laura Mullen Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. Our guest on today's show is Matt Wicker. Not only was it a great honor to be able to interview Matt about the many roles he has played in this iron art movement, it was a tremendous joy to hear so many of his stories, and I just can't wait to get into the interview so that you can hear them too. Matt, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experiences so openly, and thank you for giving us your insight into what makes the love and art of iron casting so infectious. The podCAST Iron Show is sponsored in part by supporters on Patreon. So thank you to everyone who's joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of this show. And as always, I am so proud to say that this episode is brought to you by our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, which is a national center for iron casting and metal art. For more information about the Sloss Metal Arts program, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com. But also follow them on Instagram at Sloss Metal Arts. And additionally, if you want to keep up to date on the national conference that Sloss Metal Arts will be hosting in this upcoming April of 2023, then you should follow the conference handle, which is NCCCIAP on Instagram. And also periodically check their website, which is www.nccciap.com. I know that they just opened the exhibition call, so you can find all the information for how to submit your artwork to be in the juried exhibition, and I believe that there's no entry fee, so there's no reason to not apply. For all of you listening or watching, thanks so much for tuning in, and please enjoy. Matt Wicker, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start off right away with our traditional question of, well, who the hell are you anyways?
I'm Matt Wicker, and I am adjunct faculty at RIT, and I've been there, I guess, 14 years or so now. Do a lot of other things besides that, but that's probably the easiest way to
And about your artwork, can you tell us a little bit about the art you've made?
Well, it ranges, and primarily fabrication of some sort, and then the cast elements would be worked into that. So there's kind of a give and take between cast elements and then the assembled elements that go with it.
I wish we could just jump right to iron. And I guess it is like my podcast, so I could do that. But yeah. I do want to know a little bit about maybe some early childhood introductions to art or to even metalworking or woodworking or working with your hands.
Well, a couple things that stand out, at least for me. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, north of Columbus. And in that town was a rather large gray iron foundry. And it was still in operation until I left for college. And it was a U.S. steel plant that was involved with the World War II effort. And I think they made tank parts. And the house I lived in was a small, quickly built house that was a part of a tract that was built for U.S. steel workers that worked in that plant. So even before I was even really kind of aware of my connections with iron, it was already kind of there. I think every Thursday, General Castings would do a pour. And it was a very strangely put together town. General Castings had somewhere around 100 acres, more or less in the center of town. So normally, the heavy industry would be on the east side of town, but there was still more town east of General Casting, and then there was a river, and then there was the east side of town. So basically, they pour on Thursday, and the whole town would smell like whatever the furan chemical they were using for their binder.
Yeah.
And there's a university in the town, Ohio Wesleyan. A lot of students, I started knowing more of them as they came in and out. And I knew some of the professors' children that were there, and some of the students would come around and they'd be like, "This town smells like burning tires on Thursday." And we're like, "Well, it's the foundry. They're running a pour." And I had a couple of friends that worked at the foundry for a couple of years or so. So that was always kind of just in the background of life in that town. It was really odd because it was like it was like the foundry, and then right next to it was the university. So you had like this extreme like break. Like there was very little neighborhood between the two. There was like the railroad tracks, and then you'd get over into the university property. But I always thought that was kind of strange. Like once I started thinking about it. And another really strong memory I have, that's a really, really early memory. I was really young, like 6 or 7, and we were at Colonial Williamsburg.
Yeah.
And my parents took me there, and my sister at the time. Yeah, because my brother wasn't around yet. And and something that made a big impression on me is they were casting little figurines in pewter, and
Oh.
they'd let you watch while they cast a little, Minuteman
Yeah.
soldier in pewter. And I was fascinated with the fact that it was, liquid one moment and then metal the next moment. So that left a big impression on me.
So you were already kind of introduced to the concept of casting like throughout your childhood. It was just a program kind of running in the background.
Kind of, yeah, because I didn't really pursue. I mean, I did a lot of art. I took Saturday classes pretty much every year that I could while I was in grade school and high school at the Columbus College of Art and Design. And so their students would teach the elementary and high school age students that would come in. And so we'd be on the campus on Saturdays and basically do art school stuff. I mean, you'd have drawing classes, and I think they ran like one ceramics class, but it was kind of it was hard to put together enough time to get anything substantial out of that. And then there was a printmaking class, which I enjoyed a lot. So I was doing quite a bit of art. And I think it was just kind of a place for me where I could just kind of find a quiet place to work. Like I could always have a sketch pad and a pencil, and then I kind of could be left to my own. Like I guess today's equivalent would be like whatever the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
That's somebody's quiet time.
Yeah.
If I had like some paper and one of the company pencils from the company my dad worked for, it was a really, really nice number 2 pencil that they made. And I can still remember like the smell of the cedar of the pencil. They were just a really like quality pencil that it was like it wasn't an HB. It must have been like a 2B. Probably. I mean, it was a number 2, it said, but it was a softer than that.
Was it a pencil making company, or it was just like
company
pencils?
It's just the pencils that the company had printed up, to give away to clients.
Okay. All right.
Stuff, yeah.
High quality stuff. I mean,
they had all kinds of little bits of swag.
Yeah, sometimes those little things go a long way to keeping people happy and feeling appreciated. So,
yeah.
And you definitely benefited. So when you were drawing, what kind of things would you draw? Was it sketching from life or doodling or?
Mostly just drawing from life. Some imaginative stuff. There was this wonderful kind of not really used book, but like Overstock bookstore in, what was that, Hilliard, Ohio, maybe Linworth. Anyway, it's gone now because it was consumed by the Amazon revolution. But they would have they just buy up all the books that didn't sell. And in one section they had like picture books and sitting in there were books that were compilations of paintings for covers for science fiction novels.
Oh, yeah.
So and Star Wars was out at some point, so like here's these books with spaceships in them. So I guess I bounced between drawing stuff that was like fantasy and escape type stuff, and drawing like an apple tree or something.
Okay. So then how did that kind of like, did that lead you into art in college? Kind of that tendency develop into something?
Yeah, I don't know. It's the only thing that I ever felt really comfortable in, really. I was within like a semester of getting like a degree in literature in undergrad. So I had a pretty big interest there as well, but I don't think I had like the right kind of discipline to put into that kind of effort. I don't know.
Or a career from that.
Maybe.
And I don't even know what that would entail, but I definitely don't have it.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, on some level it's got similarities,
Okay.
It's a lot of solitary kind of work to some degree. And reading was always, a nice restful place to be as well, to be in there reading, absorbing someone else's story.
So you're almost a literature major, but then what happened?
A first bronze pour, I guess, in a sculpture class.
So you took a sculpture class like as a senior in college?
No,
Oh.
No, I must have been, I don't know when. I think the first one was freshman year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was what was his name? Marshall, grad student, did kind of abstract female figures. Was teaching the class, and it was kind of the basic stuff. You work in cardboard and paper and plaster, and got to see, didn't partake in it, but got to watch like a bronze pour. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So I kind of got drawn into that. But at the same time, I was like, thinking back to undergraduate years, like just how productive a person could be. Like,
yeah, but you're so young too,
Yeah, and back then, it is back then now, but everything was cheap. Like even for students, it was like, well, we mainly poured like red brass, like scrap stuff. We had a good relationship with a scrap dealer in town, and knew all those guys by name. And one day we were driving out there to get some bronze or some steel, and we saw the owner's son walking in the rain, so we picked him up.
Yeah.
And drove him to the scrapyard because his car had broken down. So yeah, Bowling Green is, it's an interesting little town. Like we were just talking about that the other day, Bisona, that like one of the drawbacks of RIT's campus is that it's not like a college town. It's more like a industrial park. And so it's not really integrated into any downtown area, like an Ohio State or a UGA or anything like that. They just, it doesn't have that same relationship. And
I do think that
Yeah.
it factors in to part of a, a student's development, how they can
Yeah.
interact with like a downtown area. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, there's all those normal people, right?
Just
And
living their lives.
yeah, right. In the pejorative townies, but it's like RIT students are just completely sequestered from those folks.
Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of relationships and that kind of interaction just doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is kind of a drawback. I, I mean, it probably fits better in with like the post-COVID world or whatever, but it
Yeah.
seems like something's lost there.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure there's other benefits. You know, everywhere that you go, there's going to be, I feel like, I think there's going to be, you know, a give and take. And that's what then when we come together in groups from different universities and different backgrounds and different experiences,
Yeah,
like it's just such a vibrant, like range of all of the different experiences.
yeah, yeah.
So, um,
I
so,
think that's like the most attractive thing about the academic life is that behind all of it is the assumption that everyone is in some pursuit
mhm,
of of knowledge or some kind of philosophical truth,
mhm,
whether it's approaching it from the arts or from the sciences or engineering or however you want to approach it. There is an assumption that you're in the same kind of pursuit.
mhm,
So I think that gives a lot of flexibility for that kind of interaction.
mhm. I mean, so I was working at the St. Louis Art Museum as an art preparator for about 5 years. And
Right.
then during the pandemic, I got the wonderful opportunity to start working at SIUE,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a university museum there. And so I'm their art handler, their preparator, and we have graduate students that have GA assistantships that will come and work with me for like a couple hours a week. And that's like how they, you know, they get a stipend, and it's their assistantship. It's helping them go to grad school. And my life, being able to see them come in, grow, and some of them are younger than me, and some of them are old enough to be my mother, or you know, and to see, but you're right, they all have this drive, even though none of them know what they're aiming for, because
Yeah.
none of us do. And that's
No.
what I tell them too, is like I don't know, and I've been out for 10 years, and that's not nothing, but it's not like all that much time compared to, you know, in relation. But yeah, I feel definitely like I have a richer life being able to, you know, interact with them. And there's, you know, somebody from New Mexico, and then there's somebody from Utah, and there's somebody from Florida,
Yep.
and it makes my life so much more enjoyable to be able to witness that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, all right. So back to you, though. This
Mhm.
isn't about me, it's about you. So we're in undergrad, and you're pouring, now you're like picking up the scrapyard son, the scrapyard
Yep.
owner's son,
Yep.
to like
Yep.
bring him so he doesn't have to. So you got a good deal on some scrap metal and stuff. So then did that evolve into an iron introduction, or?
A couple friends of ours. One was a grad student, and one was like a kind of an exchange student from another university. I can remember his name, Rick Penterman, and he was a Green Bay fan. So where is that? Is that Minnesota? That's Wisconsin. Is that Wisconsin or is that Minnesota?
Green Bay Packers. I feel like it's
Uh,
Wisconsin,
I feel like it too,
because
but
they wear cheese on their heads.
yeah, I think so.
Nowhere else but Wisconsin's gonna wear cheese on there.
Anyway, our friend who was a grad student and the exchange student, Rick, they knew about the iron pores at Cranbrook in Detroit. And I think Julius was still there at the time, or somebody. I don't know who was there at the time.
Okay.
Might not have been Julius. I don't know who it was. Um, and and she's like, we really need to see this. It's like medieval, and we never went. oddly enough. Like we were that close because Bowling Green and Detroit are not very far apart. I know, hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that maximum. And we never did it. And then later, I guess I was a senior. Another graduate student we got to know pretty well, who we're still pretty good friends with, Rich Pfizer, who was in the glass department. And he was like, you need to know about this guy, George Beasley, down in Atlanta. Now, Rich was from Ohio originally, but he went to school. Oh, I think it was in Columbus, Georgia. And his professor would drag them up to the Christmas iron pours. And so Rich had seen one of these iron pours at one point and made a big impression on because he was a big firebug too.
So this is in Atlanta.
They saw Christmas iron pour in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, okay.
And Rich was then in grad school up in Ohio where we were, and he's like, "You really need to see this. You're way into the bronze stuff, and making molds all the time and doing all that work." He's like, "You really need to check this out." And then eventually, like, just having more and more conversations with grad students, they're just like, we should think about grad school. I mean, your degree is not going to be worth too much unless you go to the next level and then you can teach with it, or, maybe your work will progress to the point where you can, be a studio artist. And just hearing a lot of encouragement from the graduate students. And that was always like very heartening to get that kind of reaction from older people who also were just working crazy hard in the studios. So Rich Pfizer was my in to sending an application to Georgia State.
So you applied to Georgia State, but you didn't go and visit and see any. Okay.
Never did. Sight unseen.
Sight unseen. Wow.
And so and there was no YouTube, so I had only the vaguest notion. I think at one point I checked out the Metal Caster's Bible from the engineering library on campus and read through it, Hammond's book, and like didn't really understand much of it because like trying to get it to fit together with what we were doing with bronze didn't really work. And then our sculpture professor was pushed Elizabeth to apply to go to UGA because that's where he went to grad school.
Okay.
Because his mentor, his teacher was Horace Farlow, and he was a stone carver. And at the time, Elizabeth was doing a lot of stone carving. And so she applied to UGA like the same time. Well, she needed another year in school. So I spent a year, or a little over a year, maybe longer, maybe 2 years working for a glass artist in Toledo. And then we put in our applications and got accepted. So we moved down to Georgia. We managed to buy a little house in between Atlanta and Athens. And the house, like the purchase cost of the house is now what a truck costs.
Yeah. But that stretch. So obviously, I went to UGA. Like everybody that listens to this podcast, Noah even was like, "You're such a little cheerleader for UGA." And I guess I am, but that drive from Athens to Atlanta, I used to know it really well because anytime you fly, I mean, probably not as much as I don't know it as well as you do, but there's like nothing in between, I feel like. And it's just the highway was probably bigger by the time I was there. Was it just like
who knows? I mean,
I don't know. It was. I just remember hating that.
Small towns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could probably get something for pretty reasonable.
Back then, yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's so cool. So I didn't know that part of the story. So
Yeah.
you go
So
down.
going to grad school, we had missed at least two opportunities to see iron pores at Cranbrook. And we end up down in Georgia with George, who had been a student at Cranbrook under Schmidt. And it wasn't too long until we did our first pour. Um, and yeah, I can still feel like the anticipation of like the metal coming out of the furnace. It wasn't even a very large furnace. For what's like normal today, it's kind of on the small side for what it was. But then it was like, it was I think it was a 16-inch ID, maybe smaller. But it had a really tall stack, so it had kind of an imposing look to it compared to a bronze furnace. And so we're running out in the courtyard, and you take that first tap and catch it, in the crane, in the ladle on the crane, and it's like, okay, so that's just like a whole bunch of metal just dumping out of a furnace, and we're just going to catch it in the clay in the steel jacket, and away we go. And yeah, like after the pour, it wasn't even I don't think we did too much that day. It felt like a lot, but it was probably only like probably less than 1,000 pounds of metal that day, maybe a little more, because I think we had to pour some class work for one of the classes, and we get done, and it's just like, wow, that's like 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 how can you like not show this to everybody? Like just this is just amazing to like there's such a like a primal elemental kind of connection to like you just it there's something like that first experience really is kind of just like an otherworldly kind of like you have to just take that big inhale and like, okay, we're doing this. And 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 there's more sparks involved with pouring, right? Because you just I forget who said it, but someone was saying that, like, it's best just to get as much metal going towards that cup as possible, so you don't short anything.
Mm-hmm,
If things are a little sloppy, then fine.
It's okay.
You just live with it because you're just trying to, make sure you don't short it. And so there's quite a bit more sparks. And I think it was Georgia, Atlanta. So I'm sure the sand in the pit was a little damp. So there were sparklers everywhere. And it was just, it was like, it's just like a genuine experience. It like you had to be so physically and mentally at that moment right there. So like instead of like normally you're either thinking about something that's happened or something that's going to happen or something you have to do. And I think during an iron pour, like all that gets erased, and you have to just function right there in the moment, right? You become very aware of like the length of a second.
Yeah. I think I agree with you on so many. I think you're kind of bringing this to my eyes now. That might be one of the linking factors is the nowness of an iron pour is now.
Yeah.
It's right now. Yeah. It's right in front of us, and we have to be here out of respect for ourselves and our people that are, that are working with us, and all the work that we've put into making these molds.
Yeah.
And I think that might be one of the linking mechanisms, because there's like, obviously I'm an iron caster, so I feel it, but I have a hard time explaining why,
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I ask people what their favorite thing about iron casting is, they'll obviously say the community. And then sometimes they'll say they love the material or what the material represents in their artwork, but it's always the community first.
Yeah.
But that nowness is what ignites the community and almost like bonds,
Yeah.
bonds us in that moment. It's just incredible. So yeah, I have some questions, and these are details that like they just come up.
Sure.
You might not even remember, and that's totally fine. So,
That's
but
very likely.
when you were in undergrad, what kind of molds were you making? Shell molds, investment molds for the bronze?
Investment. It was all plaster investment.
And then burnout.
And then burnouts.
Okay.
2-day burnouts.
Oh. And then I'm going to say something, and I don't think it's stupid. I've never seen anybody cast iron into an investment mold.
It's been done.
How does it go?
The iron reacts poorly with the calcium and the plaster.
Okay.
So calcium adheres really strongly to the surface of the iron. It's just hotter and, just the chemical reaction at the surface. And I'm not going to say that it couldn't be something that could be worked into a piece, but I don't think I've seen it worked into a piece yet that's like successful. I mean, like for instance, I've seen glass castings that people have chosen to leave some of the investment from their plaster molds on it to really nice effect. But glass has the transparency, right? So I just don't know if there's a similar kind of situation happening with the iron at that point. Like you don't have that gift of that translucence.
Yeah.
That you can play with like that cloudiness.
I mean, it sounds like there's I've never seen it, and there's a reason why. It's because it sounds like it's not worth the effort. But maybe it is for some people, but we'll leave it to them.
Yeah, I played around with, because in the Metal Caster's Bible, there's a little section of molds for iron made with Portland cement as a binder. So I played around with a couple of those, and it works okay. But the main thing is you have to do some kind of wash, and the wash that worked best was a zircon base.
Okay.
But the graphite didn't work too good, but the zircon worked fine.
Was that with you said Portland cement? Was that also a burnout, or is it like a parted? It's
parted mold.
Okay.
Parted mold, but I think I never tried it, but I think it would work well as like a melt out, because you could melt as long as you painted the wax with some kind of wash, which we often did at Georgia State. Actually, most of the time we did. So that you had like that layer between what would, the void where the iron would fill up, and then the cement.
Okay.
Mixture.
Interesting. So when you went to Georgia State, what mold style were you using then?
Yeah, so I had to completely switch gears. Like, I guess in the last semester, while I was at undergrad, we did a couple of open face molds with like an alkyd resin base. Because we got some free stuff from Ashland, because Ashland was just down the road in Ohio. It wasn't that far away.
Okay.
It was like an hour and a half, 2 hours away. And so we tried some of it. It was open face. We didn't know what we were doing. It wasn't great results. And, open face with bronze. The bronze is like almost chilling immediately. Lots of cold shuts and stuff like that. So it was like, I don't know about this. And then I get to Georgia State, and everything is phenolic resin based. So we're doing melt outs, and we're doing parted molds with that.
Okay.
And that's all of everything was that. And I don't think they started doing shell until after I left, and I think Margie came in. I think Margie introduced shell.
So the first pour that you were at, So the ladle was on a crane,
Yep.
but it was like, was it like a gantry crane on a track or something? Or
In Georgia State,
so I've
the,
never been,
right
even though
there,
I was there for 3 years. I
Edgewood,
never been.
yeah, the Edgewood Studios is like a old, I forget what the building was used before, but one section of the building had a bunch of beams that were steel on the outside,
Okay.
and it had a roof in the past, but that was gone. So now it was just a courtyard on the side that had steel beams running across it.
Mhm.
And then down the center of that was welded just an I-beam down the center. So it wasn't a gantry because it didn't move. It was just a fixed track
Okay.
that was set up just right in front of the furnace.
Okay. And you said something about the ladle was lined. I guess I'm used to like ladles that are rammed with
Right. Yeah.
like,
So we were using blast patch from Riverton, Alabama, I think. Trying to remember the name of the town. And it's a naturally mined clay,
okay.
and with some other stuff added to it. And that's what we used to line furnaces and ladles because it was cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Because back in grad school, I think we'd buy a 3,000 pound pallet for like $80.
Oh.
And we'd use it for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Melt Zona was the name on the bags.
So how long did that stuff usually last through
It,
like the
it was
working and the pouring?
it's way more fragile
Uh-huh.
than your ramables or your castables. Um, however, it is more insulating. So it's great for ladles because it can hold the
Holds. Yeah.
heat. Yeah. It's not so great for furnaces, especially. I mean, in the melt zones, we just have to repair it
Yep.
every so often, pretty
Mhm.
kind of frequently,
Mhm.
kind of often. But man, everywhere else, it worked pretty good. And so it was kind of a ritual at Edgewood Studios to mix up a big pile of blast patch and then let it sit for 24 hours to let the water kind of penetrate completely through all the clay. And then the
Okay.
next day you start making about softball size balls,
Okay.
like a pile of those. And then somebody sits inside the furnace and somebody passes them balls all
Uh-huh.
till you fill the furnace up. And you just smack them in place with a
Uh-huh.
mallet, and you just kind of go in kind of a spiral orientation so that like they fit together like cobblestones kind of. And that was it.
So I'm part of what's really cool about doing these interviews is I'm interviewing different people and their stories are kind of like overlapping.
Right.
So I have interviewed David Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and he kind of talked about like being at UGA and feeling like the iron at UGA was still kind of being figured out when he was there. It was still
I think that's fair assessment. Yeah.
and so I'm curious to know kind of like at Georgia State, do you feel like where do you feel like Georgia State was at
Uh,
that time with the whole when we think of if we're going to talk about maybe an iron casting academic iron casting program and kind of the trajectory and heyday, I don't know
yeah, George had it figured out.
by then.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, there might have been a few changes and innovations after that, but for his studio, for his purposes, for the students' purposes, he had a perfectly good sized furnace for what was needed, for what was being made by the students and what he needed. He had it all figured out. Like really, the only hitch that was really kind of difficult was the meltout kiln was 2 blocks up a hill
Oh,
in
yeah.
a different building. So and during like a Christmas iron pour, there was always like the run to go get the meltouts, and
Yeah.
then bring them back down the hill and unload them while they're still hot from whatever vehicle was being used at the time. And that was the only thing that was a bit rough. Like, and you always run the risk of getting parking tickets because you're using city streets to
Yep.
park, to load and unload, and there's no loading zone.
Mm.
And so, like, that was the only thing that was a little like hitchy. I think since then, I don't know what's going on at
Yeah.
Georgia. I think they had moved the kiln down for a while, but I don't even know what's going on there.
Yeah.
Really.
And that's okay. You know, we go through these programs and then we go on with our lives, and they keep whatever's happening. Like, I don't know what's happening at UGA, and
Yeah,
that's okay.
I mean, it was good practice, because when we run a pour at RIT, which we haven't done very frequently, really. There's plenty of schools that pour way more iron than we do. The Georgia State, run for the molds. We have to bring our meltouts from a basement.
Okay.
Up an elevator shaft.
Oh.
And then outside down a ramp, and then underneath the jib crane to unload them. So it's like, I guess just having that kind of experience of just troubleshooting, just material handling.
Yeah.
Of what you're doing is, it just preps you for dealing with things that aren't just like perfectly smooth and easy to use.
Yeah. You're not pampered in I was thinking of another word, but I couldn't think of it. You're not spoiled. You know how to work with it.
And like you go to a shop like Donnie Keene's foundry, when and it's set up for industrial use, and everything is like ready to go, like everything's right there. You make the molds where they're going to get poured, everything's handy. It makes it like all those little frustrations like are just gone, because the whole space is designed to make molds so you can make money.
Yeah. And when it's linked with your livelihood, you're going to pay attention to those things. Yeah. So what else about grad school? So what was the program?
I can go back and talk a bit more about our relationship with UGA, because Jim Bonakorski was setting up iron kind of at his infancy, I guess, for UGA. And he brought in a student from Charles Hook, and Jimbo was good friends with Hook. And so John Rollerson was an undergrad of Hook's, and then he ended up at UGA at the same time that Elizabeth was there, or Biz. And so John started making furnaces, and they're running into problems. There's only one person I've ever seen who could run a furnace with like a high volume, low pressure blower, and that's Hook. Everyone else that I've seen try to do that, those furnaces won't work. Like we had seen the kinds of blowers that needed to be on a furnace to make it work properly. And we're like, we'll just drag one over and we'll use it. And then things were like better almost immediately. But I don't know what Hook was doing with his furnaces to make them work, but his stuff worked. Everybody else that tried to mimic what Hook was doing, they just didn't have the magic. So we just started doing what we knew worked, and started bringing, like whatever the Dayton blowers from Granger's, which were pretty cheap back then. Like, I think they're a third the price of what they are now. And Granger's were everywhere, so you could just pick one up, and you could pick that up, pick up your leathers, pick up whatever you needed, and like you had like the whole iron pouring kit like readily available at the store down the street. And so David Jones, which I still fondly think of as Spivey, which is a nickname that Remy Hanneman gave him.
Actually, I don't know. So we were supposed to talk about that during his interview, and he never
Yeah.
covered it. I
See,
don't
I don't know
know.
the full story of
All right. I'll have to.
where the nickname came from. But it's always stuck in my head. I think I'm one of the few people that calls him Spivey. I try not to anymore. But it's hard to call him David. Um, he was an undergrad there,
Mm-hmm.
and he got like way into it. He just had a lot of energy, and there are a bunch of other folks that were there too. And then so Jim was married to Leanne Mitchell. Leanne Mitchell had taught for a while in Tennessee with I think with Dennis Peacock. Dennis Peacock, Noah Kirby, and Allison Willett were undergraduates there. They came down a couple times, and I had actually poured metal with Noah Kirby at a UGA pour.
Okay.
Before actually like meeting him.
Oh,
right. So we
okay.
were on opposite ends of a ladle, and we hadn't even formally met yet. And it was like just a dog heavy like ladle. It was like one of the first taps from the furnace, and I think it was like 150 pounds, and no crane. So just lift it by hand and duck walk over to the mold and pour it. And that was like probably one of the biggest problems with UGA is Jim wanted to use bigger furnaces, but they never had any lifting equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So it was constantly trying to figure out how to make like a 4-person ladle with people carrying yokes to carry the weight, and then people on the ends with the bowls pouring. And that was pretty rough. And there was no shade in their courtyard at all. So you pour, and it's Georgia, so it's hot, and just brutal. Some of those pours were so hot, no cover.
Yeah, especially if you're like in leathers and then you're just soaked through you're like, oh, did you pour water on your back? And it's like, no, that's my sweat through the skin of the cow. Just you can
with the salt rings.
Yeah.
And and a 12-hour day was like a real day's work. Like there's no way I could put in a 12-hour day like that anymore.
But you don't have to.
No way. But that was how I met Noah and Allison.
Yeah.
It was through pours at UGA.
Yeah. Because I think Allison was in grad school, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. She was in grad school. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So was that just like kind of your first? So were you guys going up to UGA to help Jim try and get set up?
Yeah, we were just running like there. We'd often have like molds made in Atlanta and then run to Georgia, and there are weekends where there'd be like 3 pours in 3 different places, and you're like the thing you'd be trying to do is have molds ready for all 3 pours. So very early on, I think in my first year of graduate school, I kind of got taken under the wing by a non-traditional student who was kind of like the unofficial shop tech of Georgia State, Walt Stevens, and his daughter Shelly. But Walt was like he was really into it, and so at one point we had to go pick up Coke, and we went to Alabama to get Coke. And we stopped in at Sloss and talked to Paige Wainwright, and went out to lunch with Paige and Walt and me, and started getting into what was happening at Sloss.
What was happening at Sloss at that point?
Well, I think there was kind of a bit of a transfer, because we were right there at one of the first crossovers, because I think the first crew was like Rick Batten and Vaughn Randall. And Vaughn Randall was did his undergraduate at Georgia State, or some of it. I don't know if he did all of it there. And then I think he had gone off to grad school up in Washington, and Rick was just kind of getting phased out, and there were some other visiting artists who became really good friends with, and that was Eric Johnson and Alan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And so so those three pour weekends were like, there'd be do a pour at like Georgia State on Friday, and then we do a pour like Saturday at UGA, and then we'd run to Birmingham to pour on like Sunday.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So there were a number of those weekends, because one of the things that Sloss was doing at the time were a lot of road pours. I think they still do them, where they go to like high schools and they pour what they call scratch blocks. And so the students make a design and an open face sand mold, and then we come in and pour them. And, since we were getting into it, they just like, hey, we need people to come.
Yeah.
We'll pay this much. You got time? We're like, okay, sure.
Yeah, and you can pick up some fuel coke when you're in Alabama anyways.
Yeah.
Bring it back to the home.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then on the way home from Birmingham, you can pick up Blast Patch.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're hitting all the spots.
Yeah. Yep. Like one of the weirdest times coming home from a pour, the Talladega racetrack was letting out.
Oh.
And so like we saw I forget who all was in the car. I don't know. It might have been Remy. It might have been David. I can't remember. Mm-hmm. It was 4 people in the car, and I just gunned it to get ahead of the traffic.
Yeah.
Like I think I was going like over 100.
Oh man.
To just try to get around that, the infield was emptying out, and it's like, okay, we got to go. Did you have a trailer? No. Like that was one of the weekends where we were just help.
Yeah.
So we were in a car. We were just in the car, and we had our leathers, and
Okay. So then, throughout grad school, you just still pouring. Was the national conference starting to be held at Sloss by this time? Okay.
Yeah. We did. I wasn't there for like the very first one.
Okay.
But the one in 99, we helped quite a bit with. And just kind of our relationship with Sloss kind of grew from there.
What were the early ones like? What were the early conferences like?
Well, they're like the latest conference is just a little smaller. And since they were smaller, like you'd think they'd be like more chaotic or something, because there just wasn't all the practice that everyone's had since. Yeah. But since they were smaller, like really it wasn't that crazy. It was just kind of the same, but just smaller.
Okay.
Fewer people. But that might have been 99. There were just a ridiculous amount of furnaces on the pad. Like for some reason, we decided to line up all the visiting furnaces in shed 2. And so it was just a madhouse. There was just way too many furnaces. I forget how many it was, a lot. And there were so many, and there was so much mold waste that, and we were in pole position. We were closest to number 2 furnace. So we couldn't get out. So we had to get a room in town, and we had to stay and help everybody clean. So we could remove all our stuff the next day. So we got drafted for work afterwards.
Because you couldn't, when you said you couldn't get out, I was like, what is he talking about? So you couldn't get your furnace out because everybody else was.
No.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, the feeling, it's amazing how similar the vibe is. with the newer conferences as it was in the old days.
Mm.
It's maybe less intimate, because you're having to talk to more people, so you're spending less time with with the people like you've known the longest. So like that feeling of intimacy is probably a little less now.
Mm.
But
I can definitely agree to that because, yeah, I've met so many people, but it's hard. It's hard, and it's good that the community is that big, and I'm really looking forward, obviously, to this year. Almost every single person has been saying, "I'll see you at Sloss." Like, I think
yeah,
there's going to be a big group of us because we're hungry for it.
yeah,
But I just was lucky enough to go to the Western,
hmm,
and that is a great intimate
yep,
conference. I met and actually had time to kind of like marinate with new friends in a
yeah,
way that I just don't really tend to do at Sloss. But also it's kind of like at Sloss I see some of my best friends that I only see every 2 years, and now it will have been 4. And
right,
so I tend to, I think, gravitate towards hanging out with the old buddies because that's our time.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
I think that happens too. But and there's nothing wrong with it. But I hear what you're saying is that sometimes smaller and more intimate can be a nice change too. So I feel like each conference and any iron pour anywhere has its own
yeah,
benefits, I think. So
yeah.
um so where are we now in the timeline?
Uh, we spent like, I mean, we did a lot of just so many pours. Like we lost track. um, and we just met so many people that were, we still know, like Ashley and David. They're now in
Yeah.
Wyoming. They're now part of the Western. At one point, one of Lobdell's students became a grad student at Georgia State. So a good friend of mine, Matt Eaton. And so that's when, we started doing
I
like even
love
more.
Matt. I love Matt
So,
Eaton
so
so much.
we're, we could do even more work because there was kind of like 2 of us who were into it pretty
Yeah.
hard. And then we kept going back to Sloss. And then new people were kind of filtering into
Mhm.
Sloss. I met Remy after a pour at UGA, and he was way into it. And he's like, "Okay, you need to introduce me to the guys at Sloss. I need to get some Coke." And I'm like, I don't know if I could speak for them yet. Like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know. And so we arranged to go out there like the next day from the pour.
Oh,
So
wow.
we at her house, and then we drove over to Birmingham, and we talked to Eric and Alan, and got him a little bit of Coke.
Yeah.
Um, and then there was kind of a changeover, uh, you know, and then there was a stretch like, well, yeah, that was after grad school, but there was a good stretch in there. Like Vaughn was back for a while, and then Eaton was working there, and
Hmm.
then Joe McCreary,
Hmm.
and then there was really kind of this really kind of amazing time when there was like a lot of money and a lot of employees at Sloss.
Yeah.
Because there was like it was like Vaughn and McCreary and John Stewart Jackson and like Remy. And Remy brought his student in, Michael Bonadio or Bones,
Yeah.
and good friend of ours, and Julie Ward was
Yeah.
there, and Springer, John Springer, and still good friends of ours. And yeah, there was just a bunch of just good folks like working at Sloss, and as always, it's just Paige Wainwright, just fighting all the time for like every penny to get people paid.
Yeah.
Um, she just worked tirelessly for Sloss. Like amazing work. And yeah, just it's just on and on. You're like, and you meet, and it always seems like there's a lot of pairs at the time, like people that would kind of, two people would get together, and like the sum of their activity would be like a lot more than like what one of them could get done, because it was like Matt Toole and Andrew Marsh, like they were just building like crazy huge stuff, very ambitious stuff, and like there's just a lot of like pairs of people that you end up meeting, like that, like Ashley and David, yeah, and you just think of people as like paired together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if that's where their life path, was
Yeah,
at the same time for that moment and sometimes and then beyond. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, just wow, yeah, and I totally forgotten about like way early, like Brad Morton was just like this resource that Sloss used a lot, and I think he's still running Bronze Studio out of Birmingham.
Okay.
And like just the local talent in Birmingham was just amazing, because there's the Millsap brothers,
Yeah.
Forrest and Brett. I mean, just there's just such depth of energy and skill and intelligence there in the community.
And
Just
willingness to work. I
yeah,
always felt like anybody that I met that had worked at Sloss,
yeah,
they just always had this willingness and drive to, get their hands dirty and they weren't afraid of really anything that.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the big thing, like Biz and I ran a little melt out workshop that worked okay up at Grounds for Sculpture when the conference was up there, and that was when Julius ran the furnace by himself and poured by himself. Like
Wait, so tell me more about the background of this, though. So this is, you said up at the Grounds for Sculpture, but tell me, what was it?
It's in Princeton, New Jersey, or outside of Princeton, New Jersey, and it's a big sculpture grounds.
Okay.
But they also at the time were like a functioning art foundry. So that was where was it the International? I think it was the International. But like one of the eye-opening things was watching Skip Van Houten run his giant coupolette, like it just this huge machine, and just and McCreary is one of his students, and it's just like the energy that he brought to it, like really. And he was such a quiet guy, just really quiet, and it was like hard to get him to talk. But like the students that came out of his program were just like, they were not afraid of work at all. Like they just chewed through like anything that was in their way. It was really amazing to see like that crew.
And so then also you saw Julius run
Yeah,
his furnace.
he had a small, I guess it was a cupola. It didn't have a lid, but he charged it and tapped it, and had I drove a pin, and so the ladle's dead man was on a pivot on a pin driven into the ground.
Oh.
So people would just bring molds up, and he would tap into the ladle that had a stand and then swing it over and pour.
Okay.
So essentially he was doing everything himself with that furnace. And like it was kind of amazing to see something stripped down.
Yeah.
So completely.
Yeah.
And so that like one person could like manage.
Yeah.
That was kind of impressive. And then our connection with Eric Johnson, he was one of Barry Bailey's students. So I think we helped Barry Bailey a bit, just a few times with his furnaces that, were his consumable furnaces, essentially. Okay. Like they were just meant to be used once. They always had like a face to them. And yeah, Barry was just a character, just just amazing, just all the sorts of people you meet over the years.
Who did he learn iron from?
I'm not sure actually.
Hmm.
I don't know.
We'll have
I
to.
don't.
I'll have to dive into that because now that I've started this project, I just want to know everybody.
Yeah,
So
how far back it goes. Yeah,
yeah,
because you're in Edwardsville, and that was Tom Gipe's stomping ground for years. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and it's still here. There's still evidence. It's interesting because when I moved here, I didn't know that.
right.
Well, actually, I guess I'll tell a little story. So
Okay.
I, learned at UGA iron, and then I got a residency in St. Louis at this place called the Craft Alliance. But it was it was a metalsmithing residency. And so there was a ceramicist and there was a fiber artist, and you could be also like a woodworker because they had like
Right.
a turning studio and stuff. And so you didn't have to make jewelry, but a lot of people in that residency do. And so I wanted to use the residency as an excuse. Well, excuse isn't the right word. I wanted like the reason that what I wanted to do with my work was I wanted to actually get iron into my kind of jewelry format
Right.
because my degree was in metalsmithing. And so this was the first time that I didn't have any graduate professors telling me you can't do what
Right.
we think you should,
Yeah.
or like you're spending too much time over in that sculpture yard. You got to be at your bench.
Is
Like
Nofke still?
what?
Sorry to interrupt. Was Nofke still there?
He
Well,
was not. He had
no,
retired at that point. So,
he's
but yeah,
another singular person. Yeah.
yeah. Well, he and Jimbo and Leanne they're very close.
Yeah.
So I heard a rumor that he's going to be a grandfather soon, Gary Nofke. So
Oh,
it's very exciting. From
anyway, sorry
that
to
side of
interrupt.
yeah. And so, um, I made a body of work with iron casting in necklaces, and I got invited to be in a juried exhibition, or well, like it was like curated into a show at the Edwardsville Art Center.
Hmm.
And I was at the Edwardsville Art Center for the opening, and the curator, who's the professor of jewelry and metalsmithing at Edwardsville now, her name is Amy Howard Klinger. Give her a little shout out. But she curated me into the show with my iron casting necklace series. And she said, there's somebody that wants to meet you. Can I introduce you to this person? And and the person was a woman, said, oh, I was wondering where you cast your iron. And it was kind of weird because I'd shown this work before and nobody had really even, like, it was almost like people didn't register that it was iron or that I had cast. Like I made the molds in Allison and Noah's studio in
Right.
Granite City in the St. Louis area, and drove them down to Athens and
Right.
poured them at Jimbo and Leanne's property.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, because I didn't know where else to go, and he and Leanne had that pour at their property
Right.
just for me.
Oh, wow.
Like, God bless them. And
Yeah.
they called all the kids, but I think secretly he wanted the excuse to like
Sure.
pour, because at that point he had pulled it all out of the university because the university wasn't really giving him the
Yeah.
support that they used to. You need to have
You have to have some
administration
support.
understanding what you're doing. And so
Yeah.
um and so they were like, you can come, but you have to like pay for the propane. And so I like paid to get this big tank filled up. It was great. It's fantastic. And so anyway, the woman was like, oh, well, because my husband also casts iron. And I was like, how people talk to you about stuff and
Mhm.
they don't really, it turns out that their husband is actually like a blacksmith, or like they're in fabricate. Like, it's just like the connection isn't there. And
Right.
I was just like, where is this going? And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, and I said something about sometimes I go to Sloss, and she was like, oh yeah, he helped set up the Sloss conference. And I was like, well, what's your husband's name? Because maybe I know of him. And she was like, well, my husband's Tom Gipe. And I was like, and then I instantly was like
Right. Yeah.
starstruck. Like I couldn't even
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
fangirl. Like, so he was out of town. at the time, but she had come to the show because she's like really in the art scene in Edwardsville and yeah, so that was how I met Carol Geip, was because she came to the show, and
That's cool.
it was so cool. And I didn't even really know. I feel like now doing these interviews, I'm finding out more about the Edwardsville area in the same way when you were talking about your childhood and how
Yeah, it's just
like
background.
its
Yeah.
background. It's like I'm finding out more and more about how important Edwardsville and also like Carbondale and this area
Hmm.
was at the when iron casting kind of got started here
Yeah. Yep.
in the art, in using it as an art medium.
Yep.
And it's just so ironic that I happened to land here,
Yeah.
and now I work at the museum, and we have pieces of Tom's, and
Yeah.
we have, you know, my boss is like, oh yeah, there's this iron sculpture at the SIUE Gardens by somebody with, his last name is Tool. Do you know who that is? And I was like, yes, I know who that is. And so they go over and inventory the piece, and it's
Yeah.
just like those moments are really meaningful for me, and
Yeah.
to just have that little connection with the community, like the community at large, that like I just stumbled across it. So
Yeah.
it's amazing how we, you know, there's so much that comes full circle. And I'm really finding out a lot about stuff like this in these interviews. So
Yeah.
like I will listen to all of the stories forever.
Well,
So
yeah, that was, I mean, that's one of my favorite pours, was the pour where I went with Eric and Alan to pick up the uh, the whiting
mhm.
from Carbondale, because it was like Walsh's last pour, or
Okay.
one of his last pours, and it was the last big pour,
Mhm.
and like just like a day or so of just solid work, and then the pour, and then after the pour, or no, did we load it before or after the pour? I can't remember, but like we called and he's like, yeah, we got loading equipment, and like we get there and the loading equipment is like a gantry that can maybe do 1,000 pounds and a pallet jack, and we have to get it loaded into a semi trailer.
Oh my goodness.
And so and the table, who knows where the table went, but it's just like, it's just the body of the furnace just sitting like kind of like the Tower of Pisa in a sand pit.
Yep.
And like that was the day, one of the few days that I almost killed Eric. Like we had the load, we had to pick it up in a weird way,
Yeah.
change the chains. We didn't have slings, so we were
Mhm.
using chains, and chains slipped, and like the furnace kind of careened into the gantry a little bit, and Eric was on the other side of the gantry, and the gantry shifted like a good 3 feet, and we thought everything was coming down.
Mhm.
and and that was just the loading of the furnace, and then the rest of the pour and everything was just a madhouse too, like just things going on
Oh,
everywhere. And then there were the burn pieces, where people would build structures and fill them with straw, and put kerosene on it, and just to build some big fiery form, and just crazy one. And we stayed in like the worst hotel ever. And like it was just like everything was just crazy.
I
Like
want to say like,
that had to happen in that weekend, and we somehow managed to get it like all done and not like seriously injure anybody.
yeah. I
Yeah,
want to say like, are there even hotels in Carbondale, man?
not really, as
Like,
it turns out. Yeah, like yeah, it was amazing.
I will say like, so I'm going to Iron Pour at the beginning of November in Carbondale because I'm so close, and somebody
Yeah,
reached out and was, you know, kind of, you know, invited me, and Carbondale might be one of my favorite places to pour because
I haven't been there
there's
since
some it's usually small,
yeah,
intimate,
yeah,
calm. And there's
I've come
something
to
about
appreciate. I've come to appreciate calm.
and there's something about the like the history, like I can feel the history. It's different than feeling the history at Sloss, because the history
Right.
at Sloss goes way back to
Way
like
back.
the industry.
Yeah.
Um, but like when you go to the bathroom at Carbondale in those studio, that little
Yep.
building, there's
Yep.
pictures of them pouring. Like I don't know the dates on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
80s maybe, I want to say. Like,
Yeah. It's like
is that
George's. There are pictures of George when he first got the job, and he's just wearing his striped bell bottoms, and just really got drip, going on, and it's like, okay, that was a while ago.
Yeah.
And nobody's worn those kinds of pants in a long time.
It'll come back though. It all comes back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about where we're going from here. So we're probably, I mean, do you feel like you want to talk about anything? Because we pretty much stopped, or what we're talking about when you were in grad school, but then we just kept talking about stories,
Yeah,
like, which is great because that's why I do this, for the stories. And so that then the stories can be shared with people when if they love iron casting, but they're driving in their car, or they
yeah,
have to work a day job that's
yep,
soul sucking, or they have to really grind a lot of castings after that iron pour for their MFA show. Like these
yeah,
stories are going to help people
yeah,
get through those hours.
yeah.
So we can talk more about stories, or if you want to go up
I could
more.
do a transitional story.
Yeah.
One of the first years when Elizabeth, we had, was it 5, 6 years we were in Nebraska, and like we had a furnace there, and she and poured with students there, no graduate program.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a furnace at home, and like it just seems like we were pouring like every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And then she took the job. She got the job at RIT, and in the first year or two of that, we took a group of students down to Sloss, and they built like a trash can furnace, essentially, like, or just like a 55-gallon drum furnace, and slapped it all together, and they had a blast. And you were talking about people going through the grind. You have to get the work done, or get to the weekend, and I feel so bad, but uh one of our students lost a component of a sculpture he was working on, and we couldn't find it. So like he had to recreate like the form, like the pattern, and make a parted mold and get it cast at the conference to finish up the work.
For his show, or for
Yes, for
his,
his exit show. Yeah, and managed to get it done.
because
Yeah,
Sloss is like right at that time where it's like if you're a senior or
yeah,
like doing your BFA or MFA show, it could be considered poor timing. But
yes,
I mean, it's got to be, the
yes,
conference has got to be when the conference
yeah,
is. And if you can go,
yeah,
you can go. But
yeah.
yeah, I could see how that would be rough. So how did he lose it though?
We're not quite sure. It was somehow it got placed on top of like a barrel of Coke,
Oh.
and then like the barrel of Coke disappeared because it got taken to another furnace site,
Mm.
and so Timmy didn't have his iron that he needed. So yeah,
And he just, I mean,
anyway,
I feel like if you're gonna pull
he
off
made
something
it,
like that,
got it
it's
done,
yeah, that's where
got
you're
it,
gonna do it. That's
and he went on to do some of the summer sessions with Sloss.
oh
Like I think Julie in particular, Julie Ward, was giving him a hard time about losing something so vital.
yeah.
But the fact that he managed to get it back together and make something in that time, like they're like, oh, okay, yeah, you could probably work here.
Yeah. You can go, you pass the test.
Yeah, yeah. Trial by fire.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a really fun conference, whatever year that was. That was what was it? 7? I can't remember now.
It's
What
okay.
year
And
it
at
was.
a certain point, like after I've been doing enough of these interviews, like I'm probably going to cut this out, but it's like in some ways the years don't really matter. Like the actual, I used at the beginning when I first started, I would ask people like, what year was this?
Yeah.
And it actually kind of like detracts from the interviews because then they're flustered and then they're
Yeah.
backdating themselves. It's
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter. So, is there any other stories that you want to?
There's just so many. I mean, it's like you put that's like I guess that's the interesting thing about an iron pour is like there's always the unexpected,
Yeah.
like right around the corner. Like even just when we took all those students down the Sloss, I think Eric Johnson and I were running the Lance.
Mm-hmm.
And since it was the student furnace competition, like Lance was like being used a lot.
Yeah. As is tradition.
And so Eric and I, like, we spent most of the night just trundling the oxygen bottle around from furnace to furnace and climbing under furnaces and, opening up, a slagger or opening up a tweer or opening up, the tap. And it was like, and the whole time it was just, and like, at that point, like we'd seen enough that it wasn't like terrifying, but we were still like obviously paying attention, but we were just talking like in the periods in between. And it's just, and I guess it's like for people just getting into it now, you younger folks, it's like you don't realize like when your salad days are, and like until you're well past them. Like you don't realize like the experience you're going through at that moment is like going to be one of those ones that you like just remember forever. And you don't even realize it's just like, this is just something we're doing. And it's just I hope everybody gets to experience, something like that, having that, because there's all this noise and fire and craziness, and the furnaces aren't working right, and the molds are leaking, and and the whole time we're just talking about like, well, what do you want to do afterwards? Where do you want to go to eat? You want to go to the Purple Onion? It's like, I don't know if they'll be open. It's just like this simple little conversations about just life, life stuff. Yeah.
I think that's really great to bring up because I'm getting to the point where I'm trying to notice and live those moments when I'm in them. And it's you're right. You're not always aware when they're happening, but there's definitely points where I'll think this is really amazing and I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. And a lot of them are at pours,
Yeah. Like just another one just popped in my head. It was a Christmas iron pour, and we were so dead tired we decided to get a room in Atlanta. And then Eric and Alan were there, and they were too tired to drive back to Birmingham. So Eric decided to crash with us, and he had his dog Mrs. Brown with him. And Alan was too tired to even leave the studio, so he was just going to leave. He was going to sleep on the rat couch in the studio. And Eric's like, okay, I'm leaving. And Alan's so tired, and he's like, but how will I find you? He's like pulling up a blanket, falling asleep, and he's like, how will I find you? Just falling asleep.
And there was no cell phones then, so literally
Yeah,
when
we're
you
like,
left him,
we'll be here in the morning, as soon as we can get here. To sleep. Sleep on the rat couch.
I mean, at that point, if you don't care about that, you don't care about nothing.
Yeah, Alan had the talent for sleeping on the most uncomfortable things.
That's a talent.
Yeah, he slept on a pallet of sand during one of the conferences. He at the end of a melt out run, and it was a really cold night. He slept like next to the furnace or the kiln, the melt out kiln,
For the warmth.
back against it, and fell
Yeah.
asleep. He's like a Marine. He could just fall asleep anywhere. Like, he just works so hard, and then just 2 o'clock in the morning, just hit that wall, and you just
Crash.
it's fine.
Well, let's so do you want to let's talk about what you have hot on the horizon?
I honestly, I'm not making much. We
That's okay.
we've really pulled back from the pours. It's a lot of work for us to do pours, and with our responsibilities now, it's like we can't just run everywhere
Oh
to,
yeah.
to pours, and we've got a young daughter, and that takes a lot of time, and so it's like what's on my horizon. Like I'm hoping tomorrow is a good day because I got to take her to the dentist to get a filling,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
after that we got to get our flu shots, and I'm just like, if we can make it through that day, that'll be a good day. Like
Just one day at a time.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, some ways, like the kind of problem solving and energy and like devotion that like iron was for me, like I now have to like put that into raising Tegan, right?
Yeah.
It just all those centers in my brain that I was using to like solve problems at pores and stuff like are now heavily occupied with raising a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being kind of an older parent.
So it's just a like you're just focused on different things right now.
Yeah,
But
right now.
do you guys think you'll make it to Sloss this year?
Doubt it.
Okay.
Breaks my heart, but I don't think we can
Well,
make it happen.
you know what though? They're gonna keep having it. They're
Yeah.
gonna keep having it for
And
years.
that's the like amazing thing. And when Biz did her keynote,
Yeah.
3 years ago now, is it 3 or 4?
It was 2019.
Yeah. Okay. So,
And that was amazing. I can't wait to talk to her about like the photos that she has. I'm not going to spoil anything, but
yeah,
that was really like moving for me to be in the audience watching that. And yeah, she's tapped into the history like just as much as you are. So I'm really looking forward to her interview.
yeah.
But you were saying,
Well, I just think I'm so impressed with the whatever generation this is now, fourth and fifth generation of, because George and Wayne Poitras and Tom Gipe and Walsh, they were all second generation, as far as I understand it.
Yeah.
I think Julius was the the center, the start of it.
Yeah.
And so that technically that makes me a third generation, I guess. And I think you younger folks I'm just so impressed with what you guys can get done. Like I don't know, I have like my David Foster Wallace moments where I worry about our connectiveness actually being a better way to become lonely, right? Because instead of interacting with real people, like we put all of our attention into distant relationships.
Yeah.
But I'm just, the younger generations coming up who have taken over this. You guys are just the best. I mean, you guys are doing great.
Thank you. I mean, we had a lot that was already figured out for us.
Yeah.
There was a lot that was already figured out by you and the people that taught you your generation. And there's more of us now because it's spread.
Yeah, I'm still just amazed. I mean, I guess I'm not, because like the first time you pour, like, and you see it, it's like, why aren't more people doing this?
Yeah, I
And
feel
and
like,
so like everyone just becomes like a revivalist, right? You want to put your tent up and preach,
yeah.
and apparently that works, like because there's just so many people
Well, they
doing it
just, yeah, you just
now.
gotta, I mean, and it is not for everybody too. I've definitely seen people that at conferences, I overheard one student say to another student this past May in Memphis, I did not think it was going to be like this.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's not for everybody, but
no,
the people that love it, like, you know,
yeah. Well,
they love.
and some of it is like I've always like an analogy for it is it's like team sports for people who didn't play team sports
Mm-hmm.
in many ways. Like a team sports for the art nerds, the people that were quiet in the back of the room,
Mm-hmm.
doing their own thing that maybe weren't terribly, but I mean, we've got plenty of people
Yeah.
in the community that played sports, obviously,
Yeah. It's a good
but
analogy though, but there's like everybody's on the same side
yes,
against the
against the process.
furnace or with the furnace or
Yeah,
against all
against the
odds.
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what makes it, at least for me, that was like one of the draws of it is just how much you're courting failure at every
Mm.
step,
Yeah.
and whether you can thread the needle and come out of the other end of the experience with something successful.
Yeah.
Because foundry work is just one of those processes that at every single step something catastrophic can happen and you get nothing,
Yeah. Yeah.
like up until the very point where you're filling it.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
Or even afterwards. Have you ever seen like a
yeah,
big mold just you walk away
give out.
from it and
Yeah,
then it just like
yeah,
crumbles.
yep.
And you're like,
and
oh,
and
was that
part of the
mine?
mold,
No. Okay.
and part of the casting was still fluid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen plenty of those. And I mean, that was George was getting a piece together for, I think, the faculty show, and I was helping him. And he had a number of molds set up, and we poured them up in the bronze shop, and like 3 out of 4 of the molds failed, and they just you make a quick decision. You're like, okay, I'll just make it a little thinner, and it just wasn't quite enough wall thickness, and just watching George like, okay, all right, we'll just make the molds again. So make the molds again. Next day, pour them again. They're just thicker this time, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just you just have to. You get bucked off, you get right back on that horse.
Yeah.
Like,
You're,
especially if facing a timeline.
yeah. Yeah. Your personal fortitude has to be like really strong. I
Yeah,
feel like. And
yeah,
also, I feel like the process breeds it in us too. If we learn it when we're young and we like,
yeah. Well, and it's kind of like a microcosm of just like the human experience, right? Because all of us have our blind spots, like all of us, like,
yeah.
and when you're doing like an iron pour, like you're relying on other people to see the things that you missed, right? Or come up with a solution that you can't grasp at the time. And to be in a community of people that you're comfortable enough with giving up that level of agency, or just knowing in the back of your head that it's like, I know I'm missing something, but I know there's enough people here who have seen this before that I don't necessarily need to know everything. And or you just make a mistake and somebody else will be there to be like, no, that's a mistake, let's do this.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's right. And there's such a fluid give and take at a pour,
Yeah.
like, and just the problem solving that can take place just so quickly is just, I don't know. I just find it endlessly fascinating. And I think a lot of people do. Like,
I do. Yeah.
the process itself is just like a little puzzle. And like, you think you know all the parts, but again, there's always the unexpected.
Well, I feel like you've already given quite a bit of advice, but do you have any last parting words to round out?
Well, I guess one observation I can make that isn't really advice, but it's something I've thought about, as I get older. And when you're younger and you're doing it and you're very pumped up, and and you might have flashes of anger or ego between people. Like, you need to just realize that there's more time down the road usually, right? So a lot of people who maybe you had friction with in the past, you don't need to assume that you're always going to have that kind of abrasive relationship every time you interact, right? There's a lot, like, it's a process that if you're engaged in the process, like, it commands a level of respect between people who do it, so that even if, like, you don't really like someone, or they don't like you, or you're not getting along, or you've had some kind of argument between friends, or some even like some deal goes sideways, like, just let the water under the bridge go. Yeah.
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 I like that. I say that sometimes too, just to keep stories going. Here is there's water under the bridge. We don't even.
Yep.
And it's true. And I try to live kind of along those lines. I mean, obviously I'm hearing you say it. You say it for the first time because but yeah, I feel like as a person living in my life, like everybody is, it's a happier, it's a more enjoyable way to be.
Yeah.
To let things go, or be open to, forgiving or rekindling a friendship, or, letting it go. Well, I think that is great advice. So let's go end the public show and go on over to the after show. Just
sure.
I'll only keep you for another 15 minutes, but do you have have I drained the well dry of all the stories, or do you have?
Not even close.
No. Okay.
No.
Can you tease like one?
Oh, there's a time I nearly killed Toby Flores with like a 20-pound piece of coke.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So
but wait. We got to go over to the after show. So what I'm going to do, I got to say goodbye to and I have to change my battery. So, I'm for the public show, I'm going to say like, goodbye. Thanks for being on the show. And then I'll say goodbye to okay. So since this is the end of the public free version of the show, Matt, thank you so much for letting me interview you and pick your brain about how iron developed in your life and helped to develop you into the person you are. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So everybody that's listening and watching, thanks for tuning in. And we're going to go on over to the after show. I just saw Toby too at the Western. He cracks me up, like easily one of my favorite people in the community. So we're going to go over, we're going to hear this great story. But if you don't come on over the after show, we'll see you in the next one. Okay. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And what a great conversation that was with Matt, filled with so many details about his life and experiences as an iron casting artist. Hearing his memories from the time that he and his wife, Biz Cronfield, spent in Georgia, but also the time that they spent working for Sloss Metal Arts, gave me an informative history lesson about the iron that was flowing in the Southeast before I had even stepped foot in that area. So, Matt, Thanks again for sharing so many great stories with us. In fact, I think that you win the award for Best Iron Casting Stories, although I am interviewing your wife next episode, so we'll have to see if her stories can surpass the high standards that you've just set. But on a more serious note, when you were talking about the topic of being in the moment at an iron pour, and we were discussing what it means to be pouring iron and how focused energy bonds participants. To me, who's somebody that's also been in these circumstances on the iron pour floor, it's almost like witnessing a miracle. And I know that might sound dramatic, but it's something that personally I think about, and it kind of gives me comfort to know that you and other people kind of feel that flow or vibe as well. And I personally really struggle to define and express that feeling in that moment. And so my favorite part of our conversation was when we were discussing that, and you've definitely helped me kind of work out a little bit more about how to talk about that feeling, that moment, but also maybe figure out a little bit about why it adds the connectivity of this iron casting thing that we all do and love. So it was just a really great conversation. So thank you. And of course, for one last word of thanks to our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, for supporting the show and helping me capture these snapshots of our community members as they recount their origin stories. And of course, I'm truly looking forward to seeing everyone this year at the conference, which is this upcoming April 5th through the 9th. So yes, thank you to Sloss Metal Arts for supporting the podcast, but also thank you to all of our other supporters on Patreon. And the funds that they support me with are invaluable to help me to continue to produce these episodes. So in return for their support on Patreon, I humbly offer these after show recordings from each episode. And if you've been listening to these for a while, you know that it's about 15 to 20 minutes after the public show where the guest and I talk a little more candidly and share at least one more story, maybe even a little bit of a controversial story. But if you're listening, you're not a Patreon member and you want access to the after shows, you know, the lowest level is $1. And so $1 a month on the Patreon page, which is patreon.com/podcastiron. And you can choose what fits within your budget. But just $1, you know, really will help me out, especially if I get multiple dollars from multiple people, but you only have to contribute $1 and you get all the after show episodes. But if you don't have it in your budget to support the podcast Iron on Patreon, that's okay. Instead, I really encourage you to share this podcast with someone that you think would be interested, a fellow student, a fellow artist, a sculptor. Maybe you're, you know, share it with your professor. If you're in the community and you know, want to share it with other friends in the community that haven't been told that I've started this yet, like I'll appreciate that just as much, just spreading the word. So anything and everything helps. And for that, I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I can't resist one final shout out to anyone in and around the Peoria, Illinois area. Black Dog Metal Arts has changed the date for their iron pour. It was going to be last week, but now it's actually going to be tomorrow, which is Saturday, November 26th. I know that it's short notice, but I thought it might be worth a shout out to get one or two more people in the area, or just make you aware so that you're on the lookout. Maybe subscribe to their Instagram account so that next time they have a pour, we can all go. So it's breaking my heart, but unfortunately I can't make it because of Thanksgiving obligations with my family. But if you can make it, you should, and it'll be a day filled with music, local art, and iron casting. But if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.